I am Leviathan. In this video I shall be discussing the wings, and how some of them have been in the aftermath of Library of Ruina. And as before, I must warn you that there are spoilers for certain events of that game and others in the Project Moon universe. The Wings of the World. 26 mega corporations that are in charge of the city, which is actually a mega city the size of around 12 Moscows, 13 New Yorks, and 19 Londons. I think you get the idea. Each of these mega corporations rules a district as its own private fiefdom, in a pseudo-feudal system, and with that system, there are the rulers. We have A Corp, or the head, of District 1, and its arbiters. They're the ones that are the top of the pile, which is part of a triumvirate of power, with B Corp, or the Eye of District 2 and its beholders, and C Corp, or the Claw of District 3. And its, well, claws. The three birds are abnormalities that represent their, well, this triumvirate. Symbolic of how they rule through fear. The big bird representing the Eye, whose obsession with surveillance would make East Germany's Stasi look like pathetic amateurs. E.g., where they don't feel safe unless someone can't take a without them knowing about it. The head represents the long bird, or the judgment bird, which are basically like the judges from Judge Dredd if they had a show trial mentality and are sadists. E.g., it doesn't need to be 100% proven for them to judge them guilty. And finally, there's the claw, representing the punishing bird. Or punishment bird, well, whatever you want to call them, that's what they are. Where they execute people brutally. Which is a disproportionate punishment for things like patent violation and tax evasion. Yeah, they have the Vlad the Impaler idea of justice. Yeah. This triumvirate of power are essentially the bringers of the apocalypse, that in more recent times have caused the creation of what they were trying to prevent. Yes, together they represent the Apocalypse Bird! Yeah, there are a number of Greek tragedies, Oedipus Rex being one of them. Where they end up causing what they're trying to prevent. As for the rest, the nests and backstreets vary from district to district, the nests being the nicer parts and the backstreets being the nastier parts. For example, District 10 is basically Korean Las Vegas, with overworked and underpaid staff watching too many cameras for their numbers. Which is quite relevant to what I'm going to talk about next. The impact of the events of Library of Ruina on the wings. Confirmed and theoretical. Which one to start with? Oh yes. District 12. apparently the ending has changed since I played Library of Ruina. That it's just the library that was dumped into the outskirts, not the whole nest. Regardless, a new wing will need to take it over after that happened. Limbus Company will likely go there at some point, assuming that it hasn't been locked down. The two branches featured in the Wonder Lab comic are likely locations in that one, and might even involve the Bloom office, a fixer office made up of survivors of one of these branches. And it might even involve a fight with the distorted cats. Yes, one of those who was part of that branch that distorted after realizing that the manager of that branch was dead. In fact, dead for quite some time due to suicide. Yes. Now, one of the other fixers, Tai, tried to help her out, and she briefly reverted back to human form, but she re-distorted after she felt undeserving. But she said that she wouldn't forget her and the others, which implies that there is still hope for her. And there are examples of distortions, at least partially reverting back to human form. If you don't believe me, check out the Distortion Detective. Moses has done that a few times, apparently. And not just the examples featured in that story. Now, the other branch has two aberrations that are certainly noteworthy. There's Titania, a likely reference to A Midsummer Night's Dream by William Shakespeare, which is an aberration that is stronger than the original abnormality, the Fairy Festival. And then there's Nobody Is, an aberration of nothing there, which is, well, I could say equal to that, but not identical with what it does. Last time I checked, they were strangely together. With Nobody Is playing the part that Titania wanted it to be. And that suited Titania ideally. Right, let's move on to the next one. District 14. Now, this one was covered in the Distortion Detective. And based on the background image of the introduction of Miss Salt, that member of the Damn Dozen is actually from that district. Yes, I say this because that background image is how that nest was described. The nest having more white buildings than the coast of every Greek island. They also have a taboo that does not tolerate those that record video footage within District 14, to the extent that they send specialist fixers known as taboo hunters to come back with the footage, along with whoever recorded it and any who were accessories to that action. Although under normal circumstances, they don't intrude on other districts. As for their singularity, it's hinted at being the suicide vending machine, Well, it's at least their main source of income. I think it's clear what it does. It likely dispenses methods of killing yourself. Yes, I know. But what do you expect? It's a grimdark setting. It might also be used by those that want to commit murder and make it look like suicide. Although it might not be their singularity, it might just be one of their products. It's not something that's elaborated on enough yet. Oh, let's just move on. Then we have District 18. Now that's likely to have some cutbacks with its clone army production, due to the collapse of L-Corp and the power that it provided. Likely some of the R-Corp packs have likely been visited by the Ravens, which, based on what is implied, are, they're R-Corp's internal affairs division. They likely hunt down the packs that have been brought back from the library to prevent them from getting shut down as per the cloning law, which states that no more than one version of the same person can exist for longer than a real-time week. Yes, T-Corp are likely to make some similar cutbacks with its time track tech for R-Corp and also W-Corp due to the power shortages. And speaking of W-Corp, as in District 23, Cannibal Central, you know what I'm talking about, that one. Those of you who have been following through with this anyway. They cut back on their warp train services due to this power supply issue. Which is just as well considering what goes on during the journey there for all except first class. And apparently this hasn't been the first time this has happened. The L-Corp before Lobotomy Corporation was stingy with its power generation, so that wing made cutbacks during that time. Now, District 22, that's a different case, as V-Corp had its problems with... after Philip, the crying children attacked the nest, which was quite significant as it's supposed to be the most secure part of District 22, or indeed any part of the city. Yes, that likely reduced the power of V-Corp, which is quite relevant to Leviathan as it's set in the backstreets of that district. The backstreets, they actually don't look too bad. It reminds me of what I've seen of Amsterdam, although I'm not sure if their backstreets also have weed available, as in the Amsterdam of our universe, it's sold in shops there, but it's regulated. It's either Amsterdam or Venice, although they'd certainly have places for Virgilius's office to unwind. Certainly a place to eat after a hard day's work. As for other wings, it's unclear what impacts the fall of Lobotomy Corporation had on them, if any. Although the backstreets, they're unlikely to be cared about too much by the wings, as they likely see them as material for processing. Those few that are worthy of joining them can be invited in. Those that don't make the grade, while with them, they get sent back there, assuming that they don't get killed first. Although the power shortage will likely result in cutbacks with some of their more power-intensive activities. Although I doubt it will affect things like, I don't know, neon lights and casinos in District 10. District 12 will definitely need a wing to replace that one for the power supply, and quickly. Now, what will replace Enkephalin? Pain and suffering gathered through psychic means? In that case, that's L-Corp iteration. Yes, that L-Corp iteration would be big on BDSM. Assuming that the Pinky aren't masochists, it could also be something more disgusting and disturbing by our standards. Or both. Now, that creature that Roland turned into during his boss battle, it's implied it was that which was making the smoke in the smoke war. Yes, as in what he had his memory wiped imperfectly of. Why am I so sure of that? Well, we're talking about a grimdark world set in a megacity ruled by ruthless megacorporations in a pseudo-feudal society where technological progress and material wealth are values above certain things like, freedom and morality? That last one being blurry in that world. More so than ours, anyway. Idealistic people being rare. The disease of the mind that Carmen referred to being part of that reason. Yes, those idealistic people likely have a natural immunity to it, or at the very least, a resistance to it, which would explain their behavior. Anyway, let's give a shorter version of the rest of the story, from the perspective of Virgilius. Virgilius, the Red Gaze, armed with his hemokinesis granting psychoments, confronted Schadenfreude, but looked at it too long. Big mistake. He swung his blood construct, but it wasn't that durable. So he hid in a blood puddle, but he couldn't stay in there forever. But the abnormality had other targets. The distortions that used to be the orphans. Then a certain turncoat was killed. This made Virgilius emerge to confront him about his betrayal. Yes, it was revealed that he chose to do so to protect his family, as the ring would kill them along with him if he didn't betray Virgilius. Then he died. Then Virgilius moved around in his blood puddle and eventually figured out that as long as he didn't look at it, it doesn't do anything. Unfortunately, the cocoon that Garnet was in, Schadenfreude sensed that it was looking at him. Or it, rather. And that made it a target. Schadenfreude shattered the cocoon into pieces, due to it being grinded at by the circular saws. Then, despite his reserves being low, he knew he had to attack the main body. He let the saws cut him, as he needed to bleed to use the blood to make constructs. He made a sword of thorns to attack the eye socket, and then sliced it in two. Then, Lan Yen was able to get through to Virgilius, and it turned out that in this reality, their office was attacked as well. The reason for that was... it was because the footage of that lab was recorded in District 14, and clearly V-Corp had weakened greatly if N-Corp's taboo hunters were willing to operate outside of what would normally be outside of their jurisdiction, based on what happened in the events of the Distortion Detective. Yes, willing to cross borders in order to recover the footage and capture those that are accessories to that crime, if they didn't cut off their heads first. Virgilius understood that all of his office, except him, yes, except him, were dead. Then one of the cocoons hatched, and Lapis came out of it. Or at least someone that looks like her. She had a blank expression, and it responded coldly. She didn't consider herself to be Lapis. She was Charon. A completely different entity. He then took what he could, while Charon picked up a glowing shard that used to be garnet. Then dozens of armed men surrounded them. But they weren't taboo hunters. They were from Limbus Company, as a woman called Faust introduced herself to them. She offered him a place with them, with the hopes of a possibility of bringing back Garnet and Lapis to what they were before they entered that lab. And based on the game Limbus Company, he accepted that offer. And Charon, well, let's just say she was recruited as the driver of the bus that takes them from place to place. Yes, well, he had a number of reasons to accept that offer. Due to the combination of the taboo hunters pursuing him, the possibility that the ring had a price on his head now, and as far as bringing Garnet and Lapis back to what they were, he didn't have any alternatives that have, well, any chance of actually working. All that's left is going over the fixtures of Virgilius' office. I might cover other things as well. And then, all I need to do is to wait for Limbus Company to come out. Until next time. Hail the rabbit!